Okay, Dr. Dina, welcome to the mom room. It's been a challenge to get here, but here we are.
We are here.
So thank you for coming on. I always start the episodes by asking people what their transition to motherhood was like. So I was reading your bio and I was like, oh, 4 boys. Wow. Between the
Yes.
ages of 4 and 11, is that right?
Yeah, now they're 6 to 13. Yeah.
6 to 13. Okay. So
Yeah.
do you remember what your transition to motherhood was like? Was there anything that was super unexpected?
Can I swear?
Oh, of course. We
Yeah.
love
Okay.
swearing here.
It was really a total shit show. I really wasn't expecting what happened. I was about 6 months out of completing my pediatric residency. So my peds exams were upcoming. Had my first, thought it's going to be amazing. Breastfeeding is going to be easy. I'm fit. I'm a healthy person. I know exactly what I'm doing here. I'm like literally almost a pediatrician. And it was so far from that. It was really very, very challenging. I say to people all the time, and I mean it, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, having my first kid and having so many challenges with breastfeeding. I never anticipated that, did not anticipate having any issues. I really wasn't aware that so many people had issues. Now, 13 years later, so many of my patients, I would say probably most of my patients have some challenges with breastfeeding early on. And I wasn't prepared for that mentally. So yeah, it was really, really hard. I had to supplement and get a tongue tie release and I did herbs and all the things, lactation feeding, like on the breast. It was just really a lot. So yeah, it was a shit show and very, very stressful. But subsequent kids, I've had 3 since, much, much easier experiences because I had really had what I consider to be the hardest experience for me. So afterwards, it was a lot easier. And breastfeeding was easy and fine for my other 3 kids. I don't know why. I have no explanation, but it was
interesting.
very, very challenging my first. And I've seen that happen numerous times since with many other patients where their bodies just seem to get it and know how it all goes after subsequent pregnancies. And I think also when you've had so many challenges, if it then works, because eventually I did breastfeed him well and I breastfed him until 13 months, your body kind of is geared up for that in a way. And so I didn't have any challenges with milk supply with my second, third, or fourth. And I'm glad I persevered because if I had stopped with my first, I wouldn't have even tried with my second, third, or fourth. So I'm glad I did continue because it gave me confidence with my other kids.
Do you think your experience with your last 3, it sounds weird to say last 3, but the last 3 kids, do you think that was so different because your expectations were different as well? Because I feel like I only have 1 child, so I only have that experience. But I feel like if I had another, my expectations would be completely different. And I wouldn't be spending, 6 months trying to get the nursery perfect because I know that really is not a big deal and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, for sure. I think I didn't even go through that new motherhood thing because I was really knee deep into like trying to figure out this residency thing, figure it out, like finish it. I was still doing call, like 24 more hour call when I was like, 35 or so weeks pregnant. So I didn't have the luxury or the stress of like figuring out the nursery. Like I just didn't do that stuff at all. I was like, it'll come. I'll finish the exam and I'll figure it out. That was sort of my dogma. I think my later experiences, I had this experience and I was like, well, it can't be as bad. And because the latter stages of my breastfeeding journey with my first, with Dylan, were fine. It was not good, but it was fine. I was like, I'll try it again. And if it doesn't go well, I've done this like, triple feeding kind of scenario before with the pumping and the bottle feeding and the, sterilizing and all the things and the formula. I've done it all. So I'm like, if it's that bad, it's fine. I've been there. I've done that. I survived that. But interestingly, Ryan, my second, came out eager to feed. I had enough milk. He was humongous. My first was less than 3rd percentile for months. He was like scrawny little chicken. We were at my pediatrician's office every 2 weeks for 6 months weighing him. It was this humongous burden, supremely stressful. And for me as a parent, I really felt like a failure. Like parents tell me this all the time that they feel like, honestly, being hit with a mat truck is a really good, explanation. I felt like a failure. I felt like I wasn't a good mom. I felt like my body wasn't doing what it should do, what I expected it to do. And furthermore, I was like almost a pediatrician. So how could this not work? Like I thought the best person to have a baby at that time. And none of it was the fairy tale that I was expecting it to be. So I thought with my second, it can't be that bad. But somehow I had
Mm-hmm.
enough milk. He fed eagerly. He was off the chart. So my first was below the third percentile. My second was above the 97th percentile. Same human feeding him. I didn't have to supplement him. It was very bizarre. And then my other two kids were okay as well. So I'm not sure. My body knew better. I was not as stressed about it. Don't know, but it was a much different, much better experience.
And so I always wonder, people that work with kids, you're a pediatrician, how do you think having your own children affects how you do your job as a pediatrician?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I can only speak from my own experience, but my experience with my kids, I think I'm hopefully more patient with patients and more understanding. And I speak a lot from my own experience. Like I shared this experience that I shared with you and your audience with them when new parents are having trouble with breastfeeding. I'll share that I had a lot of struggles, and I run a lactation, breast and chest feeding program now, and we do tongue tie releases in the office. I do all this work because I had that really challenging experience with Dylan. And so I think I bring to my work all my experiences as a mom, as a new parent. But I think I also take home my experiences learning from patients back to my kids, if that makes sense. Like I have
Yeah.
such a profound, I feel like my own kids are such a blessing. And I'm so blessed that they are generally very healthy and developmentally doing great and behaviorally doing great. And so when I see other families struggling sometimes, I feel so much more thankful and grateful that my family is as it is. So I think it goes both ways.
I feel like struggling to breastfeed is very common. And like
Yes.
you said, a lot of moms or parents feel terrible about it. Like it's something that they're doing wrong, like they're
Yeah.
not a good mom. In your office, when you're working with parents or running the lactation clinics, what is the most common issue that you see when people are struggling with breastfeeding?
There's a few different buckets. One would be not enough milk. So when parents
Mm,
don't have enough milk production in their breasts. Another a big one would be poor latch. So a lot of babies have difficulty going on the breast, latching on the breast properly, or they just nipple feed versus being on the breast fully. And a lot those babies won't be able to drain the breast as much or remove as much milk from the breast. And as a result, a lot of these breast or chest feeding parents then have damaged nipples or bleeding, or they're uncomfortable. They're physically uncomfortable. It's really important to know that it should not hurt to breastfeed. It should not.
mm,
A lot of parents like grin and bear it and they're like, they'll get tougher, I'll get calluses kind of thing. That just isn't true. It should not hurt to breastfeed. I also did not know this with my first. It caused me a lot of pain, a lot of damage. I had no idea it should not hurt, but it shouldn't hurt. Initially, like the first really beginning of the latch, it might be a little bit stingy or, a little bit of like shooting pain, some people
shocking.
describe.
Kind of like,
Yeah.
ooh.
Like, whoa, like that's not what I was expecting. But it should not hurt throughout the feed. So we talk a lot about how to get a good latch and how the baby can be on more comfortably and how to increase the parent's milk supply. But yeah, those are the big ones, not enough milk or babies not latching. And usually they come together. Babies won't latch well if there's not enough milk. And if the baby's not latching well and removing milk from the breast, the milk supply won't go up to meet the needs of the baby. So it all kind of comes
Mm.
together.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about vitamin D. And it's funny because I feel like everybody knows that we supplement with vitamin D when we're breastfeeding, but I would bet that most people don't know why that is important. So why is vitamin D so important during a baby's early years when they're breastfeeding?
So vitamin D is important throughout our entire lives, but it's particularly important early on. Vitamin D works with calcium to make bones grow and be stronger. And of course, babies have these little fragile little bones and we want them to grow big and strong. And we want the bones to grow, as strong as they should be to support that child's growth. Breast milk alone does not have vitamin D. So for babies that are getting exclusive formula, vitamin D is added into that formula to support their growth and work with with the calcium and the phosphorus to make their bones strong. But breast milk does not have vitamin D. So anyone who is exclusively or mostly breastfeeding needs to give their child vitamin D every day with a drop or whatever product that they're using. With babies, we want them to have 400 international units or 400 IU a day. After a year of age, children should continue to get vitamin D. And at that stage, it should be 600 IU. And adults should also take every day 1,000 IU. We all need that, particularly like, we're in Canada. We don't get nearly enough sun for a lot of the year. But even when we do have a lot of sun in the summer, we're wearing hats and we're wearing sunscreen and we're wearing rash guards, which is supremely important. We want to protect our skin from sun damage, but we are blocking the vitamin D from the sun, and we need it to continue to make our bones strong. So everyone in like the northern areas of the world needs to take vitamin D the entire year, but particularly babies, especially if they're breastfeeding.
It's funny that you said, what was it? International units?
Yeah, IU is the measurement.
I was writing my notes and I'm like, 400 IU. I'm like, what is that?
What's
at
IU?
First I wrote IUI and I'm like, I think that's something else, Renee.
No.
I think you have to scratch out that I. So international units. Is that just so that supplements are like the same across
actually,
everywhere?
Vitamin D is the only thing that uses IU. Everything else
really?
uses grams or milligrams. Yeah. Vitamin D is its own unit.
Oh, okay. I had no idea.
Go figure.
So Gerber Supplements for Baby has 400 IUs of vitamin D, but they also have DHA. And this is for children from newborn to 2 years old. So can you explain what DHA, again, this is something that I've heard of so many times, but I don't know what DHA is and also why it's important.
So DHA is a type of omega fatty acid. And also, we want to make sure that babies and kids and adults get it. It's important for brain growth and development. It does go through breast milk. So we do have an ability to pass on omegas to our babies while we're breastfeeding. And it's also added into some formulas, not all formulas, but we definitely want to make sure that babies are getting enough of it and kids and adults are as well. A lot of adults will take supplement, right, with omega-3 or 6, fatty acids, and some kids as well. It does go through the breast milk, unlike vitamin D, but the parent has to make sure they're getting enough in their diet, because babies will only get it through the breast milk if the breastfeeding parent has enough of it in their own diet.
And do you think that most adults are taking in enough? Or is this something that it's very common to be deficient in?
Yeah, we don't really measure it. There's not the same measurement system as we have with vitamin D or some of the other vitamins like iron. So we don't really know if people are deficient. We certainly know it's important and healthy for us. It's often in things like fish or seafood, flax, chia, things like this. Some people don't get enough. That's for sure the case, but we don't measure it the same way we do vitamin D.
Okay, that makes sense. So the overarching theme of this episode is navigating motherhood in the early years. And so in early postpartum, I had anxiety. And it's funny because I was thinking about cold and flu season. And I'm like, oh my God, Milo was born in September. So no wonder I was stressed about him getting sick when he was a baby. And I think a lot of parents, you have this little baby, all you want to do is protect them. And I remember being in the hospital after giving birth and thinking, all I want to do is go home, take my baby home. I had to wait the 24 hours or whatever. And then you dread having to go back to the hospital if they get sick. So are there any foods or supplements that help support a baby's immune system?
It's a great question. I'm asked this all the time. There's not really very good evidence around specific supplementation for babies or for the kids for immunity. I generally speaking, recommend a broad diet, lots of different colors, right? Like eating the rainbow, making sure you're getting enough protein in the diet, whether that's, in fish or chicken or legumes, soy, nuts, seeds, meats, things like this. And a variety of different, fruits and veg, different colors, grains, calcium, also important, vitamin D that we spoke to. The biggest thing really is living like the healthiest life you can, right? Eating a variety of foods, getting enough sleep. But the biggest thing in terms of protecting your immunity and protecting yourself from getting sick is staying away from sick people. And that's, easier said than done. We learned a lot about this through the pandemic, of course. But, if you're around people that are sick, make sure they're washing their hands, mask if they can. But, going to daycare and programs and things like this, it's the reality that you're going to get exposed to other sick people unless you stay at home and you don't, socialize in that way. My kids also all born later in the year. One of my kids is the end of December. Two of my kids are October. One of my kids is August. So it's all kind of later year too. And when my second was born, he had an older, brother, 20 months ahead of him.
Oh,
He got
that's
sick within like
tricky.
2-3 months. The next one got sick like 2-3 weeks after birth. My last one got sick, I don't know, 2 weeks after he was born. It's dominoes like that. The kids were in daycare or school and they were bringing home all the viruses also. So it's realistic that your kids will get sick periodically. And the way we build immunity, the way we develop a strong immune system is with exposure. So none
Mm,
of our kids, we don't want our kids to be sick. Of course, we don't want them to be uncomfortable or have fever or, be unable to sleep or eat and all those things. But the way that they build that immune system, the way that we protect them and they develop antibodies is through exposure. So it's a bit of a catch-22. If our kids are in a bubble, they won't get sick, but then their body won't know what to do when they get exposed to things.
yeah. I always think about some of my friends who have a newborn or like a young baby at home, but then they have older siblings that go to daycare. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so stressful. Um, Speaking of the building the immunity, I did a podcast episode a while back with, I think she's an emergency medicine pediatrician in Florida. She has like a big TikTok account and she explained the like building your immunity almost as like you have a passport and every time you get a cold or like an illness, you're stamping that passport and you're like building it. And I was like, that is
Yeah.
such a good way to think of it.
I think of it
Something
as
that
an army, similar concept, but I think of it as an army. So whenever you get exposed to something, more soldiers kind of join your army. So now you have
yeah.
more soldiers to fight those various bugs when you get exposed to them.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it and like put a positive spin
Yes.
on getting
It
a
sucks to
cold.
be sick, but it prevents you
Yeah.
from getting more sick next time.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was cool, the Gerber Supplements for Baby Immune Support Drops contain probiotic B lactose, which is a bacteria that's similar to those found in breast milk, which I thought was really neat because people always say, breast milk is a really good immunity for babies. And so that supports a baby's developing immune system for kids that are newborn to 3 years old. Besides supplements, do you have any other tips? I know you mentioned some of them for parents or families in general to just prevent illness. Would you say the biggest ones are washing hands? I feel like that's
Yeah. Washing
like a big
hands.
one. Sometimes it's hard to get kids to wash their hands though.
It's
Like
true.
my
Yeah.
son's 5 and I'm like, come on, like you got to really scrub.
Yeah. I feel like
Yeah.
it's a bit easier, post pandemic because kids are so used to it now. Like they've been so, so it's been ingrained in them now to wash well and how to wash and all that. Most viruses our kids are getting exposed to in us are as well are respiratory viruses, right? So washing the
Mm,
hands is super important, very important, and definitely can help with things like pink eye or stomach flus, these kind of viruses. But the typical common cold or COVID or RSV, these kind of viruses, they're respiratory. So washing your hands is great, but if you're in close quarters with someone that has one of these viruses, you are at risk of getting them no matter how clean your hands are. So, honestly, if people are around you and they're coughing and sneezing and whatnot, like keep your distance, open a window, put on a mask or have them put on a mask. I think we're more aware of these things now, but I also feel like there's so much more like pushback. People have like swung in this other direction. Like, I don't want to wear a mask and I don't want to keep my distance. And like, we've gone through that and it's been hard. So we're going to go the opposite end. But realistically, that is the best way to minimize, exposure and risk from respiratory viruses.
I'm always so anxious about having a cough. Like I had an event in Vegas a little while back and I was getting over a sinus infection, which was like kind of turning into a little bit of a cough. And I was like, I can't sit on a plane and cough. People
Yeah.
are going to look at me. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I swear it's just allergies.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So speaking of navigating motherhood in the early years, when Milo was newborn, I started breastfeeding and I've shared my story about breastfeeding and all that stuff many times, but I was breastfeeding initially and it was great. Like he latched perfectly. I wasn't having any pain, but he was born small. So he was 6 pounds when he was born. And then I feel like a lot of parents also struggle with you don't know how much they're eating. And I remember Milo would be on one boob for like 45 minutes and then I'd put him on the other one. It was like 45 minutes. It was like this huge, big ordeal. But he started to experience diarrhea like almost right away. Like I noticed in his first poops, it was diarrhea-ish. And I remember telling people and they were like, oh, try taking dairy out of your diet and see what happens. But again, back to the anxiety, I was so anxious about him gaining weight that the diarrhea was making me nervous. And I didn't want to be like, okay, I'm going to cut out dairy for 7 days and then see what happens. Like I didn't want to wait that time. So we ended up giving him formula, which cleared it up. And then at the same time, they were worried that he was going to get jaundice if he didn't eat enough and like flush it out of his system. So that was another stressor because I'm like, I don't want to go spend a night at the hospital with him under the lights. Like, I just want to stay home. Is diarrhea, first of all, I wanted to ask you probably know this. What does diarrhea look like in babies? Because now I think back on it and I'm like, was he actually experiencing diarrhea or was that just baby poop?
Probably. Yeah. So really, really common question. So baby poop, whether it's a breastfed baby or formula fed baby or both, is often wet. I actually want it to be wet. It could be as wet as like turning on a faucet puddle kind of wet. One of my babies had that kind of poo. It could be chunky. It could be seedy. It could be yellow, orange, green, brown. All of those things are all cool. We actually don't want it to be firm. I don't want it to be able to like fall out of the diaper. So my dogma with parents is if you take a diaper with poop in it and you turn it upside down, the poop should not fall out. It should be wet enough, sticky enough to stick to the diaper. So what does diarrhea really mean for a baby? It's really about frequency. So if a baby usually stools, I don't know, twice a day and now they're pooing like 8 times a day, that would be diarrhea for them. Or we worry if it's red, like we don't want it to be bloody, right? Even green poo is totally normal. People read all the time on the internet that green poo means something bad about your milk or you have too much hind milk or too much fore milk. This is nonsense. I wish that was scrubbed from the internet. It's just complete nonsense. It only is concerning for us from a color perspective if it's red. But it could be wet, it could be chunky, seedy, mushy, all of that is normal. So for an otherwise healthy, normal breastfed baby, they can have completely wet puddle-like poos, and that can be several times a day, like 30 times a day, or shockingly, it could be every 30 days. There's no particular, it could be very many days. I've had numerous patients that pooed like once a month at the newborn stage if they were breastfed. And the idea with that is some babies have a lot more waste than others from the milk. If you're drinking milk, you don't need to have a lot of solid waste. It's milk, right? A lot of babies will have a bit of solid waste, but they might be absorbing it all and just peeing out the waste, peeing out like the urine. So it's very true that many exclusively breastfed babies will not poo every day, and they could literally go 2 or 3 weeks without pooing even once. And then there's other babies that will poo like little amounts kind of many times throughout the day. And, me as an individual, I breastfed my 4 kids. My first was a once every 2 week kind of guy. My next had puddles like 3, 4 times a day. My next one didn't poo for like 2.5 weeks. Same milk, different humans, but, same genetics. So there's really, really a big variety in that. So unless it's red, unless the baby's vomiting excessively, not gaining weight, the frequency or the color or the consistency of the poo really doesn't matter to us.
My mind is blown.
Blown. Yeah. And it's very stressful for parents when babies don't poo for a few weeks. Like it's supremely stressful. They're really worried about it. I'm like, the weight is good. Your baby looks well. They're peeing well. They're like cooing and interacting. Parents like, how to make them poo? I'm like, you don't. They're absorbing what they need and they're peeing at the rest. They don't need to poo.
So it's safe to say that tracking the number of pees is much more like telling
useful.
of.
Yeah. So I don't track pees or poos. I track wet diapers. So on day 1 of life, you want 1 wet diaper, pee or poo or both. On day 2, 2, wet pee, like wet diapers. Day 3, etc. Obviously that reaches a peak. After a week, we don't care anymore. But I do not need a baby to poo every day.
Oh my God. See, I wish I knew this. And now in my mind, I'm like, I should have another baby because I need to redo this.
Like, you'll still have questions. I had questions with my 4th, and this is what I do for a living. Yeah.
This is nuts. Like, I had no idea. And I bet you people listening are also shocked. If somebody is experiencing diarrhea with a little one, specifically age 0 to 3, Gerber Supplements for Baby, diarrhea relief, which is something that I don't think that was around back then when I was struggling with that. But it is in powder form, which is really nice because you can add it easily to water, milk, or formula. And it's also great if they're experiencing diarrhea because they're taking antibiotics. And it also stimulates healthy bacteria growth in their gut, which is, I'm all about healthy bacteria in the gut. I suffer myself from constipation. So this is very on brand for this podcast, just talking about like pooping and diarrhea. Yeah. And oh yeah, like this is my jam. So do you have any other tips for parents when it comes to diarrhea, like things they should do, but maybe even things that parents do that they shouldn't?
I think a big one is around lactose. You're mentioning switching from breastfeeding to formula. My guess is you switch to a lactose normal dairy formula, which is kind of the opposite of going dairy free, which is interesting.
I did the allergy one.
Okay. Yeah.
It was, I remember it was
formula.
Yes. Yeah. And he was like, that was perfect. And we just stuck with that for the whole time. But God, I wish I knew that about the diarrhea.
Yeah. So lactose is a big one. So when kids have diarrhea, oftentimes their intestines, adults too, their intestines could just get a bit irritated, a bit inflamed. And so they could become more sensitive. So there's not specific diets that we recommend regarding diarrhea. You often read about or hear about the brat diet, like having just really dry foods like bread and rice. There's actually no evidence that that makes a difference at all, but there is some evidence around lactose. So when you have a stomach bug, you often become temporarily lactose intolerant. Your intestines irritated and it doesn't produce as much of the enzyme that you need to break down lactose. So when kids have diarrhea, I often recommend, give them whatever food they want with reason, of course, within reason. If they're hungry, fine. If they're not, I'm not bothered as long as they're drinking. But I would notice if when they have lactose, milk, yogurt, cheese, if their belly hurts them more, if they have more diarrhea, then I would back off of that or try lactose-free versions of those things. But usually that's temporary. And, by the time they're feeling better, the lactose piece of it is back to the way it was. But there's no specific food that they should or shouldn't have other than lactose if it bothers them. Not everyone has that when they have a bug.
Does lactose sometimes, like in some people, cause constipation and some diarrhea?
No. If you're lactose intolerant, you often will have diarrhea and cramps and gassiness. What can cause constipation isn't the lactose, it's the calcium. So for people that have a lot of calcium containing foods, which again would have lactose, sure, again, a lot of milk, a lot of dairy, like yogurt and cheese, some people will get constipated because calcium is very binding. So when I see kids with constipation, which is a big part of what I do and every pediatrician does because constipation is so common, I often review with them how much calcium they're having, how much milk they're drinking. For kids that are drinking excessive amount of milk, decreasing that already can make a really big difference for them because a lot of calcium can lead to a buildup of poo.
And when it comes to diarrhea, what are signs of a child being dehydrated, especially if they are nonverbal?
Yeah. So people often look at diapers, and I don't, because diapers are very, very absorbent and they're hard to tell if a child has peed or not. I look at them. If I walk in a room, I can tell you in 1 second if a child's hydrated or not. Are they looking around? Are they interactive? Are their eyes glossy? Are their mouths wet? If yes, they're hydrated. Period. End of story. If you're really that dehydrated, you're really that dry, you're like unconscious, you're very lethargic, you are not interactive. Yeah, you're not going to pee as much, but you're also not going to be like interactive. You'll be, very, very sleepy. So I could look at a child in 2 seconds and be like, you're hydrated. Eyes wet, mouth wet, interactive with you, they're getting enough fluid. Maybe not as much as they normally get, but you don't have to worry that they need like IV fluids or something.
And if a parent is worried, like let's say their child has a flu or a stomach bug and they're worried about dehydration, what do you recommend they do? Because I've heard different things.
I mean, the first step is to make sure that they're drinking something, right? Even small amounts of fluids can make a really big difference. And it doesn't have to be something like Pedialyte or rehydration solution. This is a big thing that people ask me. There's actually very, very good evidence, actually like North American evidence that's, our hospital kind of worked on as well, which is that diluted apple juice actually performs better than hydration solution. And the reason why—
This is what I heard.
Yeah, it's not because it's better. It's because kids will drink it. So Pedialyte is gross. Like, these rehydration solutions are very, very salty and they don't taste good. So if you already feel crummy and someone's like force feeding you like salty liquid, it doesn't taste good. You're not going to want it. We would rather kids drink a little bit of something that they will actually take in, because that's going to make them hydrated. So it could be water, it could be juice, it could be milk if it's not bothering their stomach. It could be breast milk, of course, which is amazing in terms of salt and sugar and probiotics you were mentioning before. It can be any kind of fluid, but even just small amounts, but frequently. It could be like 5 or 10 mils every half an hour. That will most typically keep a child hydrated, unless they have tons of losses. Like if you can't keep anything in because you can't stop vomiting and you can't stop having diarrhea and you have a high fever, those are the kids that are at more risk of getting dehydrated. But the vast majority of kids can be hydrated orally. And in the Emerge, we rarely put IVs in. Like really rarely is a child that dehydrated. Usually fluids orally is enough. So just a little bit at a time, little bit. And if they want to eat, cool. If they don't force it. Because if your stomach's upset and you force food, you're more likely for them to vomit. Then they're going to lose those fluids and it'll be this constant thing. Eating doesn't matter. It does not matter if your kid doesn't eat for a few days at all. They might lose a pound or two. It'll come right back. If we wake up and we're a little bit lighter in the morning, it's not going to stay off, right? Like otherwise, just a little bit of not eating would lead to a lot of weight loss. Even a pound or two, I wouldn't worry, because those kids will gain it right back when they're feeling better. Just a bit of fluid at a time will go a long way.
The food thing, I feel like parents stress so much
They do.
about food. Even with when your child's healthy and they don't eat much at dinner, it's like,
Yes.
And I have to remind myself, like, he is not me. He has a very tiny tummy. He ate his, veggies and fruits that he never eats at school, but he eats them in the car ride on the way home. Like, he's probably not that hungry most dinner times.
Yeah. And a lot of kids too will have a snack after school, which will suppress their appetite. But I'd say it like from my perspective too, when I'm feeling sick, I don't want to have a big meal. I sometimes don't want to eat at all. And like, I'm not wasting away. If your child doesn't eat a proper meal for a couple of days because they're sick or they're not feeling great, it's not going to lead to long-term weight loss. And I'd rather like let them settle their stomach. Their body's telling them they don't want to eat because they're feeling yucky. To force that is going against what their body's, trying to get them to do, which is just to chill out. A bit of fluid is good.
So for a child that's age like newborn to 3 years old, if they're experiencing diarrhea, at what point should a parent consult a pediatrician or a physician?
If they're worried about dehydration, as we were talking about, they really aren't keeping anything in. But there's no real intervention with diarrhea. There's no medicine for it. Like with vomiting, there are medicines we can, stop the stomach from being so upset. But with diarrhea from a stomach bug, we actually want it to come out. I don't want to hold it in. There's medicines that adults will take sometimes. We don't recommend that. I don't recommend that for adults either, because that just causes more gassiness and cramping and discomfort. I want the virus to leave with the poo. And so diarrhea will take it out. So there's no medicine to make the diarrhea better per se. Certainly if a child's uncomfortable, you can try like a pain medicine, like acetaminophen or ibuprofen, but there's no medicine to make diarrhea stop. It's less lactose, as we talked about. Make sure they're drinking a bit. And generally speaking, it goes away within a couple of days. Rarely does it become a big problem.
Is diarrhea something that I'm just thinking if a child was, because like I know some adults that experience chronic diarrhea, like they don't have normal bowel movements. Is it common for that to happen to children and have to go through with like allergy testing or whatever it might be, like food sensitivities or anything?
Not typically, yeah. I mean, adults more likely to have something like lactose intolerant and the anxiety kind of mental health, emotional stuff that goes along with diarrhea for some older people. That's not very common with younger people. They don't have the same emotional burden that we do. So like, IBS kind of symptoms that some adults will get with constipation or diarrhea. That's more of an older kid or adult thing because we live in a stressful world and kids don't typically have those same anxieties. Generally speaking, kids have like normal poos. More likely they go constipation. Many of my kids, I would say 99% of the patients I have that have any kind of bowel issues, it's constipation end versus the diarrhea end.
To be a kid again, eh? With no stress. I'm always so jealous of my son's bowel movements. That is such a weird thing to say on a podcast, but it's so true. I'm always like, oh my gosh. And because I'm so poo focused, because I deal with constipation and I'm always, like trying to figure that out, I'm very aware of his bowel movements. And he always like wants to look at his poop and I'll be like, you got to drink more water and you got to make sure you're eating your fruits and your veggies because your poops are a little bit constipated. And so now he's always interested to look at his poop after and be like, Mommy, is it constipated? Like if it's like, you want it to be like a good bowel movement. But speaking of constipation, It is very common when kids start to eat solids, they become constipated, which makes sense. Like your body is used to just taking in liquids and now you're starting solids. Um, what do you recommend parents do to navigate that? And are there specific things if they're experiencing constipation when they start solids that they should eat maybe instead of other things?
Yeah, it is a really common time when babies will get constipated. Also, the transition to toilet training, because when you're toilet training, you're telling a child, hold your pee, hold your poo, don't have an accident. And so they hold it. And then sometimes they keep on holding it and it gets drier and harder. So those are two really big times where kids will get backed up. When we start solids, somewhere between 4 and 6 months, we recommend. I typically don't recommend starting with very dry things like baby cereals and things like this, because a lot of babies will get backed up with that. But rather, I recommend starting with fruits or vegetables or proteins, natural fibers, right? In terms of the best foods, apple is great, pear, berries, mango, legumes, and beans are really good ones. And then any kind of peas are great. I recommend if families are making food to keep the peel or the skin on. If a fruit or a veg, if you as an adult would eat the peel or the skin. So, for example, an apple, I don't peel for my kids because I would eat the peel. A pear, the same. But I do peel a mango, so I'm not going to feed the peel to my kid, or a banana. So if you as an adult would eat the peel, I keep the peel. And the reason for that is a lot of the fiber in many fruits and vegetables is actually in the peel. So if you're consistently, for one, it's a lot of work and it's super annoying. But if you wash it well and you steam it or boil it or do whatever you do to make it for the baby, I would keep the peel. That's a big one, a lot of fiber in that. Once we start solids, I also recommend parents introduce water, because when we're eating solids, we want to make sure we're getting enough fluids down to soften it, to push all the fiber through. A lot of people don't start water right away, but they can and they should. Food isn't sterile, so water doesn't have to be sterile. So after we're starting solids, we don't have to worry so much. You can boil the water, no problem, but you don't have to. Babies at that point can drink the water that we drink, as long as you're in a community with safe drinking water. But those are some of my favorite things that I introduce. And we always want to make sure that when we start solids, we do one new food at a time. So if the baby has some kind of reaction, you'll know what the reaction was from. But I with my own kids, and I recommend to other families to start with fruits, veg, or proteins, versus some of the cereals, because that could be a big trigger for constipation. And then you can add those things in once you know your baby's going every day. And that's important. So for those babies that are going once a week or once every 2 weeks on just breast milk, they should then start going every single day once they start solids. So no matter what the pattern was before, once kids start solids, everyone, adults, kids, everyone should be at least going once a day with poos. There shouldn't be any days for anybody once they're on solids of not pooing. Everyone should poo at least once a day, every day. Easy to push out, mushy like peanut butter. So that dogma I was saying before, when you take that diaper, let's say you have a 4-month-old or a 2-year-old and they're still in diapers, they poop in it. If you turn it upside down, that poop should not fall out, period. It should always be mushy enough to stick to the diaper. And that's like a good visual I use to say, like, is it hard enough or soft enough? Even if you're pooing in a potty or a toilet, like, I'm not touching my poo or my kid's poo, but if you visualize how, like, it might look like a log, but if you were to touch it, you can imagine that it would be stuck to your bum. It should be that kind of consistency, peanut buttery.
So if the poop, and I'm just going to get very detailed here because this is what we do. We talk about poop here. If the poop, like, imagine a bowel movement. There's like a poop log in the toilet. Should it be smooth, or should it have like the lines in it almost like, or is that kind of leaning towards it's a little bit dry?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a good visual.
Do you have a poop behind you?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So I don't have a poop. I don't poop. So I actually I wrote a book on this. But I'll show you a picture. So this might called the Bristol stool chart, which hopefully you'll find it here quickly. And so what you're describing is a Bristol 3 or a Bristol 4. So poop comes in lots of different versions, from really, really wet to really, really hard, but it should always be mushy like peanut butter, as I mentioned. And so what you're describing is a Bristol 4, which is that really nice smooth log, which is perfect. And a more kind of chunky log is a Bristol 3, and both are completely okay. We don't want it to be much more mushy than that, but we don't want it to be that much harder than that. What you don't want is like little ball kind of things, or like little hard ball things that kind of come together. But smooth balls with what you're describing, like ridges on them, is completely okay. And a smooth log is totally okay. And yeah, what's called is called the Bristol stool chart. And so you're looking for a 3 or a 4. And again, it should be every day, easy to push out, mushy like peanut butter. So this is called the Bristol stool chart. And what we're describing there
Oh,
is
yes,
3
yes,
and
yes,
4.
yes. Oh my
Yeah. So
gosh.
for people listening, like literally Google Bristol, Bristol stool chart. And like you could look at it. I show it to families in the room and I'm like, that's what you want. You want a Bristol 4. It's going to be mushy, stuck to your bum if you're in a diaper, etc.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm always on a mission to have the best poops because there was a period of my life where the annoying thing with me is I basically have to live my life to have a good poop. Like that's what my focus has to be all the time. Like I drink a ton of water. I do like my athletic greens drink in the morning. I have to have like oatmeal with my like fiber powder on it. I have to eat perfectly, like things like if I have soup for lunch, like that's great. Like, so I was on this roll where I was having incredibly healthy poops every single day. And I was like a different human. It was incredible.
It makes you feel so, so much better. When you're filled with
But
poop, you
it's,
feel lethargic and yucky and heavy. And if kids don't sleep well, they don't
yes.
eat well because you're all filled up with poop. You don't have good appetite. So then kids don't eat well and then they get more backed up and it becomes this like vicious cycle.
Yeah, it's awful. But what you described, like what we should be doing, that's like my dream, like living the dream. That's all I want in life.
Soft, easy poos.
Yeah, peanut butter poos. Okay, so I wanted to let listeners know if your child is experiencing constipation, Gerber Supplements for Baby has a constipation relief. Again, it's in a powder form, which is lovely because you can easily add it to their formula, milk, or their water. And yeah, another one of these things that I wish was around when Milo was younger. That's for, again, 0 to 3 years old. Before I let you go, I wanted to pick your brain and just ask you what your go-to advice is, because a lot of the listeners for this podcast have young kids. They're probably new parents or they're pregnant. What's your go-to advice for new parents? Like just in general, doesn't even have to be like physical or medical health related.
I think a couple of things just off the top of my head. So, I mean, go easy on yourself. I think that's easier said than done. I mean, I didn't do a good job of that with myself. I think you're so invested in creating this human and making them healthy. And I think a lot of people don't even fathom the idea that it may not be the best, most amazing experience. What I didn't mention off the top was like, I didn't really bond with my first kid. I think maybe partially because I had these breastfeeding struggles. I was a super stressful space, about to do my exams, but I didn't have this like instant bond. And then I felt even more guilty about that. And it came and he's amazing. And we're very close friends now, truly. But it wasn't this like instant connection. Breastfeeding wasn't instantly perfect. I didn't feel instantly back to my body. I wasn't able to like dive into studying again as I was expecting. I wasn't super motivated for him to meet other babies, like things that I expected to be easy and perfect. They just weren't. And I think a lot of people don't talk about the hard things. I think now we're doing this a lot more on podcasts and other places. So I think that's really valuable for parents so they don't feel so alone. I felt supremely alone and vulnerable and emotional and guilty about my own first baby experience. And I wish I'd heard more people say how challenging it would be. Not a single person had told me ever before that breastfeeding could be challenging. I never heard that. And I hear from some parents now still that they never heard that. And so I think it's really important to talk about the fact that early parenthood and even pregnancy can be really challenging. And it probably won't be exactly what you think it is. So if you can go in without expectations, that's almost kind of better, right? But I think it's also really important to kind of enlist your village, whoever that is. It could be, brothers or sisters or parents or other caregivers or your neighbor or coworkers, some people that can help you. In my experience, people were often like saying like, go out for a walk or go to the gym and like take care of yourself. I'll take the baby. I had a lot of difficulty with that. And I think a lot of parents do, like the idea of passing my newborn off to someone else to help. That was challenging. What I wish I had taken more of, but didn't, was people doing laundry, people cooking me meals. A lot of people would come and say like, let me take the baby. And like, that's really challenging for some parents. And if it's not challenging for you and you're cool with it, like amazing, like take that rest, take that time. But what I wish I'd taken more of is people doing the things that I didn't want to do, that people offered, but I was like, no, I've got this. Like, I've got this.
Yeah.
So really enlisting your village, and that, is helpful. My eldest is now 13. now I try to use my village as often as I can. People will watch my kids while we go for a run, or my husband and I recently went to New York City, do the marathon there. Now I'm like, anyone who could provide me support, I'll take it. And I wish I'd knew that earlier. I wish I had taken advantage of those opportunities earlier. And people say this all the time, but like, take time for yourself. It's really hard to do, but it's so important for you to do. Before you have a baby, you're this person, you have a baby and you're never going to be the person you were before. You just never will be. But you don't have to be 100% just a parent either. You don't have to go from like this person without kids, to this person with kids, and that's what defines you. And when I see a lot of parents that are, kind of, they might have a newborn, they might have a 5-year-old, they might have a 15-year-old, but those people that have put everything into parenting, they often are not supremely happy in their lives, right? So I'm a supremely happy individual being a parent. I love being a parent. I love being a mom to my kids, but I have a whole other part to my life, not just work either. Like, I'm a runner and, my friendships and everything else. I think it's really important as much as you can to like do some of the things you love to do before. You won't have the same amount of time, no doubt. You may not get to the gym every day. I may not run every day, so you're not going to get to be 100% the person you were before, but nor do you want to be. I don't want to be the person I was without kids. I love the fact that I'm a mom, but I also don't want to define myself 100% by being a mom. It's really important for me as an individual. And I think for my partner and for my kids too, to see that I'm like, I do other things that makes me feel happy, that fills my bucket. And then I'm the best parent that I can be. And so try not to lose yourself 100% in the baby stuff, because you're not going to feel great about it. At least my experience with many other parents is, if it's 100% about the kid, it's a little bit crazy making. It's very anxiety inducing and it's lonely.
Yeah. I always say, like, you should have a life outside of, I say, the home. Like,
yes.
Have your friends, have your hobbies, have, and I think because it is, in most cases, the mom that is having the baby, recovering at home, sometimes breastfeeding, it's very easy for them to, oh, I don't run anymore, because I had this long stretch of time where I was so, like, the baby was so dependent on me. I took the leave from work, so it's very easy to fall into that.
And the guilt too, the guilt of like, but I'm going to leave my child to do X, Y, or Z. I don't really need to go see a friend. I don't really need to go to the gym. I don't really need to go get a coffee for myself or go for a walk or just put on headphones. I don't need those things. And while it's true, I don't need any of those things. Without them, I'm not the best version of myself, and I'm not going to feel the best, and I'm not going to be the best parent. And so taking time, and you may not get there right away, but if you can get there early, please, parents, don't feel guilty about that. It's really important that you feel like a whole person and not just like this one part of you, which is the parent. And this goes for dads and, the parent that didn't deliver a baby, or, adoptive parents or surrogate parents, like all of these families. It doesn't have to be just about birth or breastfeeding or anything. When you become a parent in some way, it's a whole thing, it comes with it so much, but it's really important to have some kind of something outlet outside of that. And I think people are the best parents they can be if they do have some other kind of outlet. And I think it's really important for my kids to see that too.
Yeah. And even like when you were speaking about that, it made me think about how a lot of people also lose the connection with their partners, like their romantic partners.
Yeah.
And I remember I don't know if it was like a TikTok or something, but that's what I was saying. Like, if it has to do with Milo, our son, like, it's done. But for us to prioritize our relationship for some reason is such a struggle.
But it's totally for Milo too, right? My kids are going to be happier seeing me and my husband, me and my partner be close friends and still love spending time together, etc. So it's for them also. But it's also, and not just with my husband, but with my friends. Like, my kids see my relationship with my friends, and that helps foster them having positive relationships. But 100%, you came into this with your partner, if you have a partner in this parenting gig, and that relationship is worth your time and energy, if you still like that relationship, to continue to foster, because parenting is so hard and co-parenting is so hard. And so if you can foster that relationship in some way, again, enlist your village, go for a walk, go for a date night, just like order in and like put the kids to bed and have time by yourselves. We did that a lot. just order. We'd have like date night, but it was still in my house. We just order in, but the kids would go to bed and we'd eat at like 9 o'clock and listen to music. And that was our date night. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't even need a babysitter, but that was our connection time. And then the next day we were more connected and therefore better able to communicate and better able to co-parent together. And again, my kids see that relationship and hopefully that fosters for them like an understanding of what, good co-parents are and, how we communicate with one another. So 100% taking time with your partner as well if you have one.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we're recording this right now, it is 8:21 p.m. So I guess I will let you go and go hang out with my husband.
Sounds good to me. Me too.
Yeah. But before you leave, can you tell people where they can find you online? Maybe a little bit about your clinic that you have in Toronto. Let us know.
Sure. So I'm a pediatrician. I'm a merge doc, and I have a kids health clinic called KidCrew. There's 2 locations in Toronto, one in Northwark and one in Midtown Toronto. And we see kids from 0 to 18, primary care, specialty care, allied healthcare. Lots of stuff happening at those locations. And I am on social media everywhere at Dr. Dina Kulik, DRDINAKULIK, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all the places. And also my blog, drdina.ca and kidcrew.com as well.
Awesome. Well, this was so fun. Thank you. I have to have you back and just like talk about all this stuff because
talk about
I really like these.
Talk about
I
babies,
like these topics.
All the things.
Yeah.
A big part of my day is talking about poo. Honestly, it's a big concern for parents. So it's my jam too.
I love it. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.